Hello, welcome to the Teapot Reads. My name's Sam, I'm the Teapot, and it's so great to see you today. My book is just kind of far, so I can't do my normal introduction, but hello. I hope the fan in the background is not making too much noise, but I needed it on today. It's one of those days. I wanted to just do a very quick review of Uzumaki by Junji Ito. I finally finished reading this book. I have been reading it since October of last year, so it has taken me a while. I've been reading one chapter or two chapters at a time in between other volumes of manga because it is just like so overwhelmingly gross. I received Uzumaki as a gift from one of my members of my family, and that's the only reason I read it. I actually had no interest in Uzumaki or in Junji Ito at all. I think I have spent a lot of time saying I will never read Junji Ito, not necessarily on this channel, but just like in life, because I knew it was not something that appealed to me. I don't read a lot of horror, and I also just find the art wildly gross, even like non-gross things. But that's not uncommon. That's like a very like common thing people will say about Junji Ito's art. It's very, very distinct. I am glad I read it. I think that objectively it is a very good book, and as someone who would love to be working full-time in the creative field, I do think it made me a better writer and storyteller and made me think about stories in a unique way, and that of course can only make me better at interacting with stories. However, I was totally right in that this is not at all the genre I like to read or an art style that sits well with me. I was so uneasy while reading this. I think that means it was doing its job. Uzumaki is Junji Ito's spiral story. Basically, there is this town that becomes infested with spirals and different forms of spirals, and things spiral out of control. It is a horror graphic novel, manga. I don't know why I called it a graphic novel. A horror graphic novel. On the scale of manga, it's definitely closer to literary than maybe the typical manga you're used to. If you are a big fan of horror or a big fan of horror manga, you've probably heard of Junji Ito, and if you haven't, definitely pick him up. Like I said, it does kind of verge on the disgusting a little bit. There is a lot in here that I just am slightly traumatized by. And literally anytime someone says spiral, and it's happened a couple times, someone, I was at lunch with a friend, and they were like, oh, and it kind of like spirals up, and I like had this whole moment of just like, spiral? No, we don't talk about spiral. Like, it was this like full reaction. So this book definitely leaves an impact, right? This book definitely leaves an impact. I don't think I can talk about this book at all without going into spoilers. So this is going to be your last warning that this is a spoiler review. I am not going to ruin the ending. I am probably only going to talk about the first third, because originally this was clumped into 3 different volumes of manga, so I'm only going to be talking about the first third. It goes up to chapter 7, which chapter 7 was probably the most disturbing chapter for me, I think. And it's also, interestingly, a chapter that doesn't really come back to haunt us. It has effects on the story, but we see a lot of like early stuff that does come back. This, or a particular thing that happens in chapter 7, doesn't. So like I said, I'm not going to be ruining the ending. I will say though about the ending, I wasn't unsatisfied, but I also don't read or watch a lot of horror, so I don't really know how it stacks up against other endings in the genre. So for me it worked, but I don't know, I've seen a lot of reviews and people say that they dislike the ending, and I mean, maybe if they're a big fan of the genre, they probably have nuanced reasons for it. I did like the ending. I thought it fit this story. Let's talk about this quickly. I'm doing the review in part to kind of like move past it, like flush it from my system. I am really happy to have read it for my family member, but also like for myself, like I said, but I do need to move past it. I've been reading it since October. It's been like haunting me since October. So let's talk about this. And like I said, there will be spoilers for the first 6 chapters because we're going to kind of go just like through them. So first of all, we have the beautiful and absolutely disgusting end pages. This this. Just want to take a moment to talk about Junji Ito's art style. Like I said, it is disgusting, but it is very distinct, and I really enjoyed the sort of diversity of faces I felt like I was seeing. Not all manga, I think, has like diverse faces. They'll have like diverse hair and diverse styles to characters, but even though a lot of these characters had very plain, normal hairstyles, I could tell them apart. So I did really like that. That's like a positive. And as disgusting as I found the art, I thought it was really good art. And I also really liked how he drew women. So that's a small thing. And how he drew hair. That is like, for whatever reason, something, if I don't like how an artist is drawing hair, I cannot read it. It's mostly about Kiri. That was the girl you saw in that picture. She's telling the story of what happened to her town. And it's her and her boyfriend Shuichi are sort of our protagonists, although we do get other main characters or borderline main characters as the book progresses, mostly in the final third. Kiri is our anchor, our focal point for the whole story, and she has a very interesting relationship with the spiral and with the town as the story continues. I liked that she wasn't a very atypical character. She was a very normal person. Even though she sort of has an interesting relationship with the spiral, she's not different. She's not special. She's not unusual. She's just a high schooler. I think she's a high schooler. She could be a middle schooler, but I'm pretty sure high school. And I really liked her. She was down to earth. I think that her concerns, because her boyfriend Shuichi, his parents basically get infected with the spiral right away. They're the first victims that we see on page. And he tries to convince Kiri to leave the town with him. And she says no. And I think in a lot of fantasy, it's very easy to call our protagonists dumb and to be smarter than them. But in this case, as in like any fantasy book, right? Especially set in the real world, just with fantastical elements, our protagonists don't know they're in a story. They don't know what genre of story they're in, and Kiri definitely doesn't. But whereas some books, I feel like those characters, you're reading it and you're like, you're so dumb, like there's all these red flags. This is such a weird thing to happen. Why would you assume it would keep happening? Why would you assume it's a red flag? You feel very much with Kiri that you're like, why would you leave? You're a high schooler, you have no money, really. What would you do out in the world? Why would you leave your family? Why would you leave your hometown? I feel like every decision she makes throughout the novel is as informed as it can be with like things, like all her actions are very informed by what's going on around her, and they're all smart, or as smart as they can be in the situation. Again, she doesn't know what sort of genre she's in until later. She does figure it out pretty quickly. She is probably more on the mark than a lot of other protagonists I've seen without being like ahead of the mark. Like I said, she's not anything special. She's a very normal person, and it comes across from page one, and it works really well, and it really, I think, highlighted the absolute morbidity and horrific events happening, because you can very easily put yourself in her shoes. I love that. I also love that there really wasn't any particular violence or horror against women or against Kiri being a woman. I do feel like, from my experience with horror stories, they tend to a lot of times be rape allegories or allegory, however you say that, or violence against women is a really easy sort of quick thing that happens in a lot of horror stories. It doesn't really happen in this one. Any violence that happens just happens, and it's not a gender-based really violence at any point. Not to say there aren't gender politics at play, because that happens in any story, but I do think it was a really good job in this one. Which, did you see? Apparently they're making it an anime. I'm not sure if it's a film or a series, but the art is really gorgeous. Actually, you should look it up. I will link the trailer down below. But we start with a very like simple premise, the simple spiral. This is Shuichi's dad looking at a spiral and being just absolutely enamored with it, and from there we get not only this obsession, but it starts twisting his body, which is thoroughly disgusting. And poor Shuichi, he knows something's wrong, but he doesn't really understand what. I think of our protagonist, he fluctuated between being very interesting and then not interesting. At the end, he definitely becomes a lot more interesting than he was in the middle. He does kind of disappear for a bit. I mean, he physically disappears because after his parents die, he just kind of retreat into himself and out of the world, and then is kind of forced back into the world. I almost wish we had seen a little more of him though, because sometimes I'd be like, is he around? Like, what happened to Shuichi? Do we care? do we? I do love that him and Kiri maintained a relationship and that it was actually a very sweet relationship. They don't have a lot of tender moments except for at the beginning because there just isn't time. But I did really like that they stayed true to each other and they seemed to really care and love each other. It wasn't an overblown, over dramatic, over romantic story, but it was very sweet and very, very honest and felt very real and very easy to root for them and their relationship. Was totally for it. We get, like, look at these spirals, okay? Will it focus? Look at those. It's, what's that thing? Tryptophobia, where you don't like small holes. This is kind of similar vibes. And yeah, so he becomes obsessed. It's like, I don't know, borderline gross. I did one thing I loved and hated in equal measure was how many spirals Junji Ito was able to shove into this story. I think that it's a little incredible how many spirals there are out in the natural world, as well as that we have in our like daily life. I have started seeing them just about everywhere. It is fucked up, okay? It's so fucked up. If you don't like body horror, and I don't like body horror, there's so much body horror in this book. And I think in pretty much any Junji Ito story. Look, oh, no, I'm not going to show you. It's too gross. It's just so much gross. After Shuichi's dad becomes like infected with a spiral and then ends up dying, he becomes a spiral. They cremate him, and then the ash particles go up into the air and in the sky create a spiral. I think that this book does a really good job of making events work like domino effects. There is quite a bit of time where one of the characters is in the hospital for something that happened. And while in the hospital, a lot of things are not only laid out, but events will happen that cause events, that cause events, that cause events. Obviously, that's any good storytelling, that's any good novel, but I think this one does it in such a deliberate way that it's not subtle because it doesn't have to be, but it keeps the pacing almost like perfectly chunked off. It literally was like dominoes, where each domino takes the exact same time to fall, has the exact same effect, and results in just like this huge chain with very few like links missing. Yeah, so it was just really, really well done. There wasn't a lot of wasted space. There are some things, especially in the early middle part, like around chapter 7, that half of the chapter will be like, oh, this affects a lot, and half the chapter will be like, we will never come back to that. Okay, that's fine. Probably just some things were cut. But you want to see just a disgusting image? Okay, I'm going to show you. This is the first truly disgusting image in the book. Okay. That's Shuichi's dad. It's sort of a beautiful picture. It takes up like the whole fold, but so it's so fucked. The spiral being this entity without a name or a face. It has a name, it's the spiral. But without a name or a face is, I think, more powerful than giving it some sort of solid presence. I think the fact that it really is a thing that permeates everywhere, even in the real world, made this novel even more encompassing and haunting. It worked really well. The first third of this novel is fairly normal episodes of life interspersed with wild spiral activity, and I think those were the parts that worked the least for me story-wise. They just felt not repetitive, but it was like I knew something big was coming, because you can tell something big is going to come from the very first page because of how Kiri is telling the story. But I just found myself sort of anticipating, not necessarily eagerly, but anticipating what was to come. And there's quite a lot of episodes before anything big really starts to happen. So I don't think it was wasted time, but again, there are some things that are like laid out that don't really have a direct impact on the final sections. Like chapter 3, where the classmate has like a spiral on her forehead. No one else has like a spiral on their forehead at any point. So I did appreciate that this is sort of probably Junji Ito testing his chops, seeing what was out there. And it was also a serialized story, I'm sure. So weekly people would be able to tune in, and they don't necessarily need to be reading chapter 1 or whatever to be able to continue. But the spiral, especially the girl, she has like psychic powers. That never comes back. I actually completely forgot about that. until just now, flipping back through the book. So yeah, no other character has psychic powers. Although maybe it's supposed to be an early example of the spiral being interested a little bit, I guess, in human affairs. It's so gross. Oh, I can't believe I'm reliving this. Something that I really thought was interesting is the comparison between Kiri's father and Shuichi's father. So Shuichi's father, like I said, is the first one affected by the spiral, but Kiri's father is affected as well. He's a potter, he makes clay things, and he uses the mud from Dragonfly Pond, which is like an epicenter of spiral activity. He is like slowly going mad across the whole novel, but he never goes fully mad. He doesn't like lose his mind. I thought that was really interesting. We don't really see a definitive reason for that to happen, except maybe, I mean, we could probably say Kiri and her family kind of keep him in line, but like Shuichi's mother and him were there for his father. So I just think it's interesting that we have this sort of dynamic, and it's almost a little, it's horrible in its own way that Kiri has to live with a parent who is just like obsessed with the spiral in this way. I liked that. I liked that we got to see people at different like points of in the grip of the spiral, and even if it's similar circumstances to other characters, like we get to see different sort of reactions to it. I think it makes sense. It's a lot to do with human nature. Again, I don't think that like Kiri's father is special or anything, or like a chosen one, but he just reacts differently. I thought that was interesting. I liked that added a lot of nuance to the horror elements, and it's not just like a one size fits all killing machine thing, you know. Also, like the dead people, I guess that is, I'm not gonna say anything. I just made a connection with the end of the book though. So that was cool. I love when a story is tight, and this one is tight enough to please me. That's saying a lot. I feel like I talk about it a lot. Like if a story is like circular, you know, eats itself. I think my favorite chapter, actually chapter 5, I think it is. Yeah, chapter 5, Twisted Souls. This is sort of a Romeo and Juliet story, where we get these two characters who they live in the same row house because they're these really old row houses in town, which I was a little bit obsessed with row houses. They were probably my favorite part of the book, world building wise. And basically these really old row houses are where if you don't have much money you can go. And these two families are in two of the like clumps in the row house, and they can hear each other through the wall, and they're always fighting. But the son of one family and the daughter of the other are their kids, but they're in love and they want to run away. And Kiri is going to help them, and obviously it doesn't turn out. The families are really trying to prevent them. And I think the reason I really liked this, because ultimately they do get away, but they get away because they become these like spiral things. The spiral in a sense saves them. I mean, they're still fated and fucked over. Like, they go into the ocean, these like spiral snake things. I'm not going to show you that picture because that's like even more fucking disturbing. In a way, they're saved and they get this like happily ever after. And again, I could probably connect that to the end of the book. I do think there's quite a bit connection there. But I liked this one. It's flipping that. Every other chapter, the spiral was horrible, but it is almost like a silver lining in this chapter, and I do think I loved that as much as I could love this book. I loved chapter 5. I thought it was just perfect and great. Then we have chapter 6, which is the last chapter I'm going to talk about for this review in depth, which is not much to say except that Kiri's hair gets cut, and I loved it. I loved not only that her hair got cut, but that she stayed with the short hair for the remainder of the story. Do we have a picture of it? Here we go. This is not the most flattering picture of Kiri, but I really appreciated the haircut. You know, the physical representation of this change she has just gone through. Like, she has to get her hair cut because she's directly affected by the spiral. The spiral gets in her hair. This is sort of the point where there's no turning back in the story, and also no turning back for Kiri. It's also sort of this first symptom we have of the spiral directly affecting her. She is, of course, the protagonist, and so the spiral will directly affect her in different ways as the story progresses. But I loved the commitment Junji Ito had to keeping her hair short, because she's a fairly pretty girl, and that haircut, like I just showed you, doesn't do anything to flatter her. So I like that. I liked the commitment to just sort of cut up your darlings a little bit. I liked that. It's not something I feel like I see a lot in manga. Again, not reading this genre of manga or more literary manga. I'm typically reading action stories or romances, so this thing probably wouldn't happen in them, but still, I liked it. And yeah, anytime a girl cuts her hair in a story is just powerful. Absolutely for it every time. Fully support. So I think I ultimately rated this like 3.5 or 4 stars. I stick with that. I'm never going to read another Junji Ito, or if I do, it will be years down the line, decades. Those are my thoughts. My slightly rambly thoughts on Uzumaki. I'm done. I can move past this book. I'm not going to unhaul it because it was a gift from someone I care about. So I'm just going to hide it at the bottom of the stack, or maybe put it in the basement. I don't know if I want it in my room. We'll see. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you, especially if you're a subscriber. It means the world to me that you are here. Thank you. If you are somewhere cold, I hope you're staying warm. If you're somewhere warm, I hope you're staying comfortable. And most of all, I hope you're reading a great book. I will see you guys next time. Bye.